Hello, 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 hello. This is Marshall Goldsmith. So happy to be talking with you today from LinkedIn Live. I'm going to briefly introduce myself and then we'll begin. I'm an executive educator, traveled all around the world giving talks and classes, and used to be ranked number one leadership thinker, executive coach. And now I'm in what's called the Hall of Fame. That's where they put old people and let young people take over. It's very good, very good. And then I write books and articles. So I've written or edited 41 books, 6 bestsellers, and 35 purchased by my mother, my father, and associated relatives. Now we are here today with my wonderful friend and comrade, Sanyin Siang. Sanyin, I'm the old number one coach. Now she's a new number one coach, Thinkers 50, number one coach in the whole world. Sanyin, say a couple of words about yourself and then pass it over to Whitney and Pamay.
Great. Thank you, Marshall. Hi, everyone. I'm Sanyin Siang. I'm the executive director at Duke University's Coach K Center on Leadership and Ethics, where I'm also a professor over at the Pratt School of Engineering at Duke. And I'm so excited to introduce our guest today. So we have Whitney Johnson, who is, if you don't know Whitney, look at her LinkedIn, check out her newsletters. She is one of the most thoughtful and leading thinkers in the world, especially when it comes to disruption. And her book, Disrupt Yourself, which we'll learn more about today, is one of the best-selling books on the topic. And then Marshall, why don't you introduce Pamay?
Well, Pamay is a chief learning officer of Kraft Heinz. She's also working on something called the Passion Project, which I just love. See all kinds of neat stuff she's doing. And, one thing I forgot in the introduction, I always forget things. First is, if you have questions about learning for Whitney or Pamay or about disruption, please ask. And then the other thing I forgot to mention is I went to this program called Design the Life You Love and asked career heroes. And my heroes are these kind and generous people. And the nice woman, our friend Aisha Bursell, said you ought to be more like them. So I came up with this idea of I'm going to adopt 15 people, teach them all I know for free. And they get old, they do the same thing. Well, I thought maybe 100 people would apply. I was a little bit off. Over 18,000 have applied. And so now that I think we've adopted about 250 people in our program, and now we're getting new generation. So my fine honorary adopted children are Sanyin and Whitney, who I love. So honored to be your honorary adopted father here. And now Whitney's adopted Pamay. Now I've got an honorary granddaughter here. So this is a wonderful, wonderful little family. So let's get rolling. Sanyin, why don't you get rolling by asking a question to Whitney and I'll ask one to Pamay.
Great. So Whitney, a lot of us right now, disruption is hard. Change is hard. So why is it so important, especially now, to embrace disruption in order for us to navigate forward, especially during this time?
Great question. And the reason is very simple, because the fundamental unit of change or growth in any organization is the individual. So as we're all moving through this massive change, this massive upheaval, this massive disruption, if we want to not drown in that disruption, but rather ride or surf this wave, we begin by disrupting ourselves.
So if we take it down to the individual level, then what does it mean to disrupt yourself?
Good question. So what we did is, after working with Clayton Christensen, the legendary Clayton Christensen at Harvard Business School, we had co-founded a fund called the Disruptive Innovation Fund, and looked at disruption for products and services and companies and countries. And I had this insight that this theory of disruption wasn't just about products, it was actually about people. And so developed a 7-point framework of personal disruption that includes, and I'll go through them very quickly, but things like taking the right kinds of risks, learning to create rather than compete, playing to your distinctive strengths, embracing your constraints, and being discovery driven. So those are just 4 of those 7 steps. But if you will follow those 7 steps, whether they're guardrails for the present, because right now we mostly need guardrails, or accelerants for the future, that allows you to disrupt yourself. And then you feel like you're acting rather than being acted upon in this disruption. And that innovation that you need in order to move forward will start to power, again, be safe now, but power your way forward through the disruption as it is currently happening.
Oh, I love that. That's it's the focus not on product, but on people and the human factor. And then this idea of everyone being able to embrace disruption in order to continually learn and grow. So over to you, Marshall, for Pamay, who's going to talk about that.
You know, Sanyin and Whitney, I think that Whitney should work on developing a song to go with her book. Disrupt yourself. If you don't disrupt yourself, ain't nobody gonna give a big hoot. Disrupt yourself. So,
And I'm going to have you record it, Marshall. You can record it, and we'll all be your backup singers.
Pamay, we're all one happy family here. Pamay, my special honorary granddaughter. Honored to have you be an honorary granddaughter, member of our little family here. Pamay, why is it important to be a lifelong learner?
That's a really great question. As you mentioned, I'm a chief learning officer. Lifelong learning is part of the core of who I am and part of what I tend to be an evangelist around at my company, Kraft, Heinz, and basically anywhere that I go. I like to think of lifelong learning as a catalyst, right? A tool for transformation. And certainly in the times that we're seeing now, where we're collectively facing a very challenging time in human history, it's important to use your superpowers, right? To walk through whatever we're going through, to learn through it, to learn our way out of it. So I think of learning as a superpower and truly believe that a commitment to learning can help people to be great in their life, great in their current careers, and to grow great careers, to figure out how to execute with excellence in whatever roles you play, whether that be in your family, in your community, in your organization, and in your own personal life. And so I think learning is something that once you determine that you can commit to doing that at all times, everywhere, that you can really see change and positive impact in your life and the life of the people who you touch.
Now, you know, Pamay, you got a couple of neat things you're doing that, and you know, I'm going to copy these. And when I first began, I'm sure I will credit you, but after a week or two, they will have become my idea. So anyway, a couple of things I just love. One of them is 365 days of learning, and the other one is 52 weeks of worship. I just love the whole concept of the packaging of that is really cool. So let's start. What do you want to start with? The 52 weeks or the three? Give me both. Start with either one you want.
I'll start with 52 weeks. I'll start with 52 weeks because that came first, right? And that is a project that I've been working on for 10 years and came out of a time of great personal challenge. In 2009, my father passed away and my grandmother passed away months apart. And in order to deal with all of that grief and pain, I decided that I was going to make a personal commitment to visit a different place of worship every week for a year. So churches and mosques and synagogues and temples from the south side of Chicago to South Africa, from Brazil to Brooklyn. And it ended up being something that it meant to just be a healing journey for me, but it ended up being transformational. And although I call it my passion project and it runs in parallel to the work I do in learning and development, there are so many parallel lessons. I think what it has allowed me to do, and whenever you put yourself in a place where you're learning things that are so different than what you know, and you're meeting people who are so different than who you are, you get to practice. You get to practice being curious. You get to practice stepping out of your comfort zone. You get to practice talking to people who share beliefs that, with others that you don't particularly share. I like to use the word practice. Anyone who's on my team knows that I talk about practice a lot. Physicians practice, people practice yoga. I believe that wherever you're going, when you walk into a place, you're given an opportunity to practice who you want to be in the world. So the first project that has defined me is that 52 weeks of worship. And that inspired 365 days of learning. So when I joined Kraft Heinz in 2018, I was brand new to the role of Chief Learning Officer, brand new to the Kraft Heinz company, and decided to apply that same power that I learned from my 52 weeks to learning within the walls of my new corporation. And on a very snowy day on a bus back from a leadership conference in Toronto to the airport, I just made a small, quiet commitment that I was going to learn something new every day for a year. So I moved from 52 weeks to 365 days, learned something new every day. And for me, it was within our corporate university. and share it out to the organization so people could really see what it looks like for a leader to model a commitment to learning and see the impact it could have on a person. And then invariably, it's had an impact on our organization as well.
Yeah, I love that. And Sanyin, you're responsible for remembering everything on our show. Harry Kramer had a good saying. He said, I'm like Harry. He said his wife told him, she said, Harry, you have a very good memory. It's just short. So I have a very good memory, but it doesn't last very long. So anyway, Pamay, I want you to come back on our show again with Sri Kumar Rao. Sri Kumar Rao is another one of our fine family members, and he's been studying how you apply lessons from various philosophical things to day-to-day life. So I think it would be great fun to talk about what you learned during that experience and then how that applies. And maybe you and Sri Kumar could be together. And then Sanyin, you are responsible for ensuring that this happens. Very good, very good. Okay, what's a good question you have for Whitney?
Well,
So
actually, I think about what you just said, Pamay, and Whitney said about disruption and disrupting yourself. And it suggests that often, because we don't like change, we wait for disruption to happen. But what both of you are saying is, no, we actually have agency. Don't wait for the disruption. When you have the agency to learn, you're able to disrupt yourself. And that's how you can actually have more control over who you want to be in the future. So the question for both of you is, what's the role of reflection? Because learning comes from reflection. And so how does this play in this practice of 365 days of learning?
So well said. One initial thought I have, Sanyin, is this idea of, you said, Pamay is encouraging you to proactively learn. I'm encouraging you to proactively disrupt, which basically are synonyms for the same thing as move forward, make progress. And what's interesting about right now is that none of us actually had to decide whether we're going to disrupt. We just got pushed off of our S-curve of learning, and now we have to figure out what we're going to do. On the reflection side, what I would say is that it requires, at least for me, I keep a journal. I have my journal right in front of me. I have tons and tons of journals, actually. And every day I'm making notes of what I want to accomplish that day. And I find that when I'm willing to, as the day progresses, not just at the end of the day, but throughout the day, be able to make notes of, okay, here's what worked, good, tag that so my memory remembers what is working and I can do more of that. And then also, if something didn't work, what's the learning from that and how can I course correct quickly so that I don't tell myself a story that's not true and not believe that I can continue to learn. So the reflection is actually incredibly important. And I think we need to do it on a daily basis. And I find that it's effective for me when I do it daily, but also on a weekly basis, and can really make meaning of my week. And when I'm really on my game, I do it on a monthly basis as well, so that I'm able to iterate and start to aggregate up these learnings and be able to disrupt myself and move along those S-curves of learning increasingly quickly, which is for me the goal. And I think probably for most of us, we want to get better faster.
Everyday chapter.
Just a second. Now you're talking about the S-curve of learning. We can't assume everyone listening has any idea what you're talking about. So just take a second, because you quickly leaped through the S-curve of learning. And you taught me this at least 3 times, and I'm not sure I even remember what it is. So what's the S-curve of learning?
Okay, so the S-curve of learning, you just picture an S, so like this. And it was originally popularized by E.M. Rogers in 1962 to help us figure out how quickly an innovation would be adopted. And right now we know we look also at viruses and how quickly those are going to spread. But the insight that I had, in addition to the fact that disruption isn't just about products, it's about people, that this S-curve could help us understand how we learn, how we grow, how we develop. And at the base of the S, your growth is slow, or it feels slow because exponential growth has not yet kicked in. Then you get into the sweet spot of that S, where you're in hyper growth, and in a little time you learn a lot. And then you get to the top of that S, where growth starts to slow again. You've started to reach mastery. And so you climb up that S, you learn, and then you want to leap and repeat. And that's what growth looks like. And so when you think about disruption, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm on a new S curve, which we all are right now because of this pandemic. Now, how do I move up that S curve quickly and effectively using those 7 accelerants of disruption we talked about? Once I get to the top, then I want to be able to leap. And so the more quickly you can move through those cycles, the more effectively and quickly you can develop and grow as a person.
Very good. Okay, Pamay.
And yeah, I will say I'm just going to give a little bit of a few props to Whitney, because prior to me taking this role, and I've told Whitney this myself, I was working in another company in New York City, and I had a good, 2 weeks between my old role and my new role. And I listened to her podcast every day, because the idea of disruption and preparing yourself to walk into a new, bigger platform and to start that S curve, it was just an amazing inspiration. And I agree with you completely that the reflection part is so key. And in that 365 days of learning, it wasn't just me taking a course or reading an article or even going to a live conference. It was reflecting on what I learned and then sharing it through our corporate networking app with the rest of the organization. So taking that moment to reflect help me, and I feel like helps everyone apply their learning in different contexts. So it's almost as valuable as the time spent learning as the time you take to pause. I like to say, determine what to practice and what to keep. You may decide one day, you know what, I have a really difficult conversation to have with a team member. What is the one thing I'm going to practice in the 30 minutes I need to have that difficult conversation? Focus on practicing that. And then once it's over, say, oh, what worked? Oh, that didn't work so well. Oh, that did work. Let me write that down as something I want to keep. Let me write that down as something I never want to try again, or I want to try in a different way. And it is that constant cycle of learning and practicing, reflecting and learning and practicing and reflecting really gives you the opportunity to make things that need to be part of who you are. It solidifies that and determines, you know what, that's not who I am. And that whole cycle has served me personally, professionally, whether I'm walking into a temple full of people I don't know anything about, or I'm walking into a meeting with senior leaders where I say, okay, today, this is what you're practicing in this meeting. And so that's what I think about reflection. So important. And so few people actually take the time to do it. And once you do commit to it, you'll find that your leadership practice, your learning practice really begins to help you be the person that you want to be.
Very good. For both of you, a question, because we want to get to the audience questions in just a second. What is one bit of advice you would have for leaders and learners during these turbulent times? And Pamay, you go first, and then Whitney.
Yeah, I'll say, anytime of adversity, focusing on who you want to be. Who do you want to be in the midst of the storm? And I'm also one of the many things, Marshall, you mentioned that I am a performer. I studied improv at Second City. I take a lot of the lessons that I've learned from performing. I'm a storyteller. What is the story you want to tell when this is all over? Do you want people to say, oh, wow, Pamay was so level-headed. She didn't have a lot of information. She was decisive. She was communicative. She was honest and authentic. Or do I want people to say, wow, she really had she couldn't figure out how to lead her way out of a paper bag. She freaked us all out. What is the story you want to be told at the end? And then learn your way through to that. Figure out what information you need to take in, what your trusted sources of information are, what you need to practice so that you're writing that story as you're walking through the storm. So I think if you maintain a laser focus on who you want to be in the midst of the storm, that can help to direct your learning practice.
Very good.
I love that, Pamay. I love that. Focus on who you want to be. And I would love it if you would share the hashtags. What are the 2 hashtags that you have? Learn like an owner. And what's the other one?
Yeah, learn like an owner, which is take ownership of your own learning and development, and make time for learning, because of course everyone's busy, and so you have to make time for learning. And leaders need to do that so people can see how they do it, and especially if they're very busy. So thank you for that.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. So I guess just, 2 things I would say, and building on what Pamay just said, is that what I think is really interesting right now is there's this sorting mechanism going on. It's just like Harry Potter and the sorting hats, is this notion of watching and observing as this disruption is happening. What are people doing? Are we acting, or are we being acted upon? Are we drowning in the disruption? Or are we riding that wave? And so I think that's one thing for people to think about. And this really builds on what Pamay said, this idea of who do you want to be in this moment? And I think the most important thing for people is just to show up and show up in the sense of, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to not do it perfectly. It's going to be messy because we're all at the low end of that learning curve and we haven't figured it out, and we don't know what it looks like. But if we will show up, people will know that we have, and they will have this sense of, I don't know what it's going to look like, and I don't know what the other side is going to look like, but this person, they're here, they're with me, and because they're with me, I believe that we can move through this. And so that to me would be the thing that we're looking for is, do you act or are you acted upon? And really the bottom line question is, are we showing up and being in it rather than pulling back and staying on the sidelines?
Okay,
You're so
Justin.
cute. You always clap
Justin.
for us.
Yay. We don't get enough recognition here in the world. Now, Justin,
Love
a
it.
wonderful methods organization, a fine organization putting this on, does all kinds of neat stuff. Justin, what's a good question for our fine guest, Pamay?
Hey there, Marshall and everybody. Thanks for coming to the show. A lot of great questions flowing through. There's a couple of themes I'm seeing. One of them has to do with books. And Pamay, we've got some comments here. They're curious where you got your bookshelf from. But on a more serious note, there was a question from Deepak Chada that says, do you have any books or resources that you could share with us on S-curve learning?
Oh, okay. So I'll take that. I think the first one is, I happen to have a handy dandy book right in front of me. Is you can read Disrupt Yourself, but you can also read, so you can see that one. And then also we talk about the S-curve of learning in the book, Build an A-Team. And they're both published by Harvard Business Press. So thank you for asking. And then obviously, I've got the podcast, but those are the two best places for you to start in terms of understanding how we're using it for learning for you as an individual and also in structuring your team or organization. Thanks, Deepak.
And I will say, I love books.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Marshall. I was going to say, I love books. You can see that one of the things I've learned is I'd rather read a book than listen to someone, an audio version of something. These books I've been gathering for my whole life. When I move, the movers are always like, hey, so you want to take all of them with you? But in terms of learning, they are a real foundational piece of my learning practice.
Okay, Justin.
Okay, so we have a question here from Ranjita, who asks, and quite a few questions actually around this that has to do with commitment. And Ranjita asks, how can someone stay committed to continuous learning? And we had another that's very similar that says, how do you keep your commitment for learning when you have so many tasks during the day?
Okay, let's start with Pamay on that one. Pamay, fire away.
So, I think we've all tried to do things in our life that require a great deal of commitment. And actually, I find that one of the reasons why people are so delighted by my projects is because they ask those sorts of questions about how did you stay committed? And really the answer is you just do. And that's not really probably very helpful. But one thing that I will note is, especially for 365 days of learning, is that it doesn't have to be an hour long this or 4 hour long that. 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. The majority of my learning experiences for that year were 15 minutes. I knew how to find an article from a university on a specific topic that took 15 minutes, or a LinkedIn learning course that took 10, 15 minutes. There certainly were times on the weekends where I gave myself 4 hours, 8 hours for face-to-face learning, immersive situations. But one way that you start a commitment, and I love reading any book about habits, right, is you just start thinking of yourself as someone who's committed to that thing. And even if it's 1 minute, like working out, it could be 2 minutes. I just want to think of myself as someone who does it every day. And there were definitely days during that year where I thought, oh my gosh, it's 11:35 and I have 25 minutes to finish this learning commitment that I've made before, the clock strikes 12. But I realized it doesn't have to be, an hour-long thing. It can be a 5-minute thing, a 3-minute thing. So I think that what I would say is give yourself permission to just do the thing regularly. It doesn't have to be something that takes up all the time. And then one day you'll wake up and realize, wow, I can't imagine not doing this thing. I've been doing it for so long.
Yeah.
Excellent, Pamay. One of my other new honorary grandsons is Curtis Martin. I don't know if you had a chance to meet Curtis Martin. He's a great guy. Curtis Martin, number 5 rusher, I believe, in NFL history, member of the Hall of Fame. And Sanyin, my wonderful person with the memory. Let's have a Curtis Martin and another one, Ray Lewis, on the show. I think that'd be fun. So we'll have a couple of football players on the show, and they can talk about some of the things that they've learned, because new members are a happy club here. But anyway, Curtis Martin yesterday was talking to me, and he said his coach was Bill Parcells. He said Bill Parcells talked to him about the importance of commitment. And he talked about working out. He said everybody goes through the same workout, and they're spending the same time. We're all going through the same routine, but some people are committed and some aren't. Some, when they go with that workout, they're giving it everything they have. They're better and want to get better and better, and some are just putting in repetitions. And he said, to Curtis, he said the difference between the superstar, which turned out to be Curtis, and the normal person is that superstar is always committed. They're not just putting in the repetitions, they're committed and they're making it work. Now, let's have one final reflection for our wonderful audience. We'll start with Sanyin. Sanyin, what is one final reflection? Listen to our wonderful 2 guests talk.
Having clarity around who you want to be it starts from there, and then working backwards about how you can, what you can choose to learn and how you can choose to grow along the S-curve. That's my takeaway.
Very good. Whitney, what's one reflection from you?
I think building on that, when you said who you want to be, the thought that I had is I think about my why a lot. And when I do my work, I want everybody that I'm interacting with to have a greater sense of their fundamental worth, their value, and also of who they can be and their possibility. And as I'm listening to you, Sanyin, and you just talked, Marshall, about this idea of commitment, and then Pamay, just 5 minutes, just show up for those 5 minutes. Just a reminder to me to anchor myself every day. And I think for all of us to anchor ourselves in our why, because I think if we're anchored in that why at the bottom of the S-curve, thank you, Sanyin, for saying that we're going to be able to climb the mountains that we need to climb as we move forward. So thank you for all of you giving me lots to think about today. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Pamay.
I love the idea of, show up. Because the fact of the matter is so many people neglect to do that. And those who have the courage to show up, and I like to say practice when you are showing up, who do I want to be? And the one way that you learn how to be is to put yourself in lots of different situations. Put a mirror up to yourself and say, okay, do I like what I see? Am I want to keep this? Do I want to alter this? What do I want to practice and what I want to keep? But you have to show up. And so I like the idea, because when in times of adversity, it takes perhaps a little more energy to show up and to definitely decide how you're going to show up. So I like that a lot.
Finally, I just want to say thanks to all of you. It's been a wonderful, wonderful session. I'd like to have all of you come back again. Whitney, you come back, and Pamay, you come back with Srikumar. I think that'd just be great fun. And then again, thanks to everybody for listening to us. Basically, all of us, we have the same mission in life, as to help you have a little bit better life out there. And anything we say that's useful for you, please use in any way that you can. And the other stuff we said that sounds like nonsense, just take a deep breath and let it go, let it go, let it go. So again, my honor to work with all of you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.